Today on the Dolby Institute podcast, we have writer, director, producer, cinematographer, and film editor Robert Rodriguez in conversation with his composer and son, Rebel Rodriguez, to discuss their new thriller, Hypnotic, starring Ben Affleck. We discuss how they finally completed this film after years of COVID-related delays, why the filmmaker still prefers working in Austin, Texas over Hollywood as his production hub, and how he's made filmmaking a truly family affair. All that and more on today's podcast, so stay tuned.
What do you see? Your daughter? The park?
Wasn't paying attention, just for a second.
Work?
Think I'm ready for duty?
Do you feel ready?
I think it's the only thing keeping me sane.
So, Robert, I know that this has been a passion project of yours for a long time. I know that you've wanted to make a Hitchcockian thriller for many years, and I know that the original plan where you were supposed to shoot this movie in 2020 in Los Angeles, and of course, we all know what happened in early 2020. Just tell us what effect did the pandemic have on the film and on your plan for making it?
Well, I'd come up with a movie 20 years before, so I was used to it being pushed around a little bit, but it was tenacious. I originally was going to do it. That was going to be my project of 2015 until I talked to Jim Cameron about Alita, and then I ended up doing Alita, and it got pushed. But that's when I had actually written a final draft, was in 2015. I'd only had parts of the story over the first 15 years. And I was really determined to make it, especially once you start. When you actually start a production, it's already now in your head. And for COVID to shut it down, I knew it just was going to be a matter of time for once that lifted, whenever that was. It was harder because it was an independent film. Actually, I went and did Star Wars for some time because Disney has the money to just make everyone wear a mask and push out the product. We didn't have that kind of money. It was an independent production. So we had to wait because insurance companies would charge us a lot to have people working under those conditions. So we had to wait till things calmed down. So we started the movie like 3 times. And each time we had Ben at one point and Elise and, I had my dream cast, but then we lost them on the next round. And then that one shot down. And then when the final one, they were all back again. So I was glad I just been in this business long enough. You have to be tenacious enough to hang on like a dog, keep your bite on the whatever you're after and not let go. And it was just so gratifying after all these, and weird to even be talking about it at all. It's been that project for 20 years that was someday going to happen. And now this is one of our first interviews.
I mean, like as a point of reference, I've been hearing about this project throughout my entire life. I mean, he would just say, "Oh, there's this idea, Hypnotic," and I'd be like, "Whoa, that's cool." And you're just growing up with hearing it. It was like a myth.
It's a mythical story.
And then it's like, we're making it. I was like, wow, really? Oh my gosh.
Right?
It's really cool. Yeah.
Oh, that's really funny. That was part of your childhood growing up. One of the challenges that I love about this movie is that it's really challenging the viewer to kind of question, like, what is the nature of truth and what are you seeing and can you trust anything? Which I think is it's a pretty cogent message right now as we're looking at AI generated images and all that stuff. So you've really made it a very timely film. Yeah, but as a storyteller, I was really curious about obviously, when you're keeping the audience guessing like that, you kind of have to walk a tightrope of keeping them guessing, but without losing us completely. So I'm curious about your development process with the script and how you kind of walk that tightrope of staying ahead of the audience, but not too far ahead of the audience.
Yeah, it's tricky. I hadn't done a thriller before. I knew that was going to take the time to write. It can't be fudged like my usual movies where it's kind of like, it's like dream imagery. It's like dream logic. A lot of my movies, somebody can suddenly have a machine gun full of, guitar case full of machines or machine gun for a leg. It's more, it makes sense the second you're watching it and not a bit of sense later. Sometimes it's just pure filmmaking from the id, Jim Cameron called it once. It's just like unbridled. Yeah. But this one I knew had to work more like clockwork. It had to work more like a Hitchcock thriller where you can't reveal too much, you can't reveal too little. And so that was the real dance, was figuring that out. But it was also, what it really appealed to me was you can't help but put yourself in your movies. What I liked about the concept was that it's a lot like filmmaking. It's a lot like what we do as storytellers and what audiences do to themselves. They let themselves be subjects. They come into a theater, they pay money to go into a theater, they sit down, and they allow the filmmaker to create a hypnotic construct with actors, with sets, with dialogue, with music, sound effects that aren't real, so that they believe enough in what they're seeing that they can invest in it and emotionally either cry or laugh or applaud at the end. And they're in that world. So what if that just extended further, and that's why you see in the movie, you see behind the curtain at some point and see that there's sets and there's actors saying lines and they repeat themselves. And it's like the audience realizes, oh, we're as fooled as anyone because we put ourselves in there. So it's a very meta kind of idea, which is what I always loved about it, was that you're just fully into it like you would any movie until you see, really what's going on.
Yeah, and I've been nervous about spoilers, but you said the actors and the reveal of the sets and that stuff, which I got to say, like, having been over at your place at Troublemaker Studios a couple times, I was like, wow, this is the most ingenious, inventive use of Robert's backlot at Troublemaker in Austin that I've ever seen before. That was really creative and genius.
I was determined to do that, and my entire crew said, "You can't show that. That doesn't make any sense story-wise." And I said, but it's sitting there. I'm using it because no one cares. It's great production value. And I own this set. It's a leftover set from Alita. I'm using this set. So it was really, that's just my kind of resourcefulness. And then it totally works in the movie at that point where you see certain things. There's a lot of things you see and don't see in the movie. And I like it being $2 tricks where it's not necessarily a visual effect. It's just an edit. You can just be looking at one thing and then it's like you start seeing things. I like that $2, trick effect to it. And a lot of the movies like that. And that's what Hitchcock movies were. So I was inspired by utilizing what you do. Because of COVID shutdown, we had to shoot most of the movie here in the studio. We couldn't go travel around. So it worked story-wise, too. It reinforced the story we were telling it. It all worked better for the story, which was magical.
It all went back to that kind of El Mariachi thing of when there's no money left on the table, the only production value you can bring and expand to it is creativity. And so a lot of it became even more creative and more driven by that. And it was really cool. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, I've got some questions about that I want to come back to. But, for me, like the heart of the story it's really about a parent's love for their kid. And your movie, Robert, is really a family affair. I mean, obviously, Rel here did the score. I know your son Racer is one of the producers on the film, and your other son Rogue did some of the previs animatics, right? So tell me about collaborating with your family and sort of how that makes the experience richer for you.
Well, it's been a constant in my career. I mean, they've started as actors and stud kids in the Spy Kid films. He was a young Shark Boy, the youngest Shark Boy in Shark Boy and Lava Girl, and another character in several of my movies. And Racer, my co-producer and co-writer, he was on set with me every day. We'd always have to be updating the script. He's not a credited writer on this, but he was writing with me because we'd have to change things because of all the changes in locations and because of COVID. Every day we were doing rewrites. So to have them be a part of this from the beginning, they already know what I like. They already know what our worldview is very similar. So they're just the best collaborators to have. Rebel's already making music while he's seeing footage come in. And you just get a head start where you wouldn't get that with a regular crew. So to see them grow into those roles, and they just blow my mind. Like, I used to be the composer. He outplays me. He just writes circles around me. So I just had to give him the whole job because he just knows so much. We gave him piano lessons since he was 5. And he just became our best piano player and then now our best composer. And so that kind of investment in them, I didn't realize was going to turn into this thing where they're my favorite people to work with. Just last night, we're sitting around the dinner table. We're talking about the next idea and we're coming up with story ideas. It's like there's no separation between life and play and work. I mean, it all goes together. Yeah. And that's what you were saying, how enriching this was.
Yeah, it was. It's really cool. I mean, even before we were, of course, in the Spy Kids movies, but even in between that, I mean, we're all drawing in the living room on the floor, just like, and that some of that stuff eventually became drawing concept for a lot of Shark Boy and Lava Girl, and going in the pool and coming up ideas for Shark Boy and Lava Girl, the most ridiculous things, but it's like it gave it such a kid-like essence as well that we all kind of pitched into it and stuff, and it was so we've always kind of been a part of it, And now that I'm really working with my dad, I really see that, like, no, we've always been doing it. It was just work and play are almost no different for us. It's all just really enjoyable.
And now they're the age where I was when I was doing Mariachi and Desperado and all that. I was like, wow, this is like, I was on fire back then with all these ideas. No wonder these guys they're at that age where it's like, if I need help with Hypnotic, I need myself from 20 years ago to come help me finish this thing. And I got them. I got a whole bunch of them. So they come with all these great ideas, and it's like, wow, divide and conquer. Let's just take over this thing. Yeah. They've become essential to my process for sure.
Rebel, tell me about your background as a musician and how you got into composing and how this journey's kind of happened for you. I mean, obviously, we just found out that you've been studying piano since you were 5.
Yes. So, it was kind of a part of, I have a lot of siblings. And so it was the easiest. We had a beautiful piano, beautiful Steinway. And so it was like the easiest thing was we all learned piano, and, so that way we can all kind of, if we had different interests, maybe we could move into a different instrument, but at least everyone kind of got a foundation on piano. And so since I was 4, actually, I was very tenacious to want to be a part of it and learn what my older brothers were playing and stuff. And so I got into it a little early, but I played all through, school, high school. I stopped taking lessons, and I loved it so much. I really wanted to find some way to use it. And I don't know why it took me that long for it to pop into my head and go, right, people write music for movies and like for stories. And I've always loved that. I always would play my piano piece and envision a story kind of in my head of what it sounded like. And I'd start conforming the piece to fit that, like the image in my head. Like, no, this part should be slower. This part should be faster. It should be louder. I just start breaking the rules a bit of how it was supposed to be played, because I had this idea in my head, and I loved that idea of having music fit a story. So from there, I started composing music, and it was on a small VR short Racer and Robert did that was The Limit. And he had asked me, he was like, hey, you want to come like write maybe a song or two, try something out, since I was composing for like about a year then. And I ended up writing most of it. I really enjoyed the process. And from there, we jumped on to the next one, which was Red 11. And that was my first feature film score. And then from there, it's just kind of gone up. But what was really cool with this one was Red 11 is almost entirely a synth score. I was still just kind of learning, wrapping my head around, writing to picture and understanding pacing and character and tone and all that kind of stuff. And then the next film I did was We Can Be Heroes, and that was all orchestral. And then so with Hypnotic, I mean, right from the start when they told me we were going to be shooting this, and they were picking the script back up, finishing it up, finalizing it, I thought of the theme for it. And I was like, the whole idea is that this one should be a hybrid. It should be orchestral and it should be synth at the same time. So I wanted to kind of bring together the skills I'd gathered from the past two into this one, and create a really interesting kind of hypnotic sound, reminiscent of Hitchcock, but since we loved the Vertigo theme and all that kind of stuff. And
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because, of course, like with the Hitchcock films, those Bernard Herrmann scores are just classic and so important to like. And the thing that I noticed right away about your music for Hypnotic is like it is relentless. It is dramatic and propulsive and really heightens the tension. So talk to me about sort of like your approach to kind of scoring the particularly the keeping the tension in this film going.
Yeah, so that was actually really interesting because the thing with scoring films that I've really started to learn is there's usually a scene, and you kind of approach it like almost like a crossword puzzle. It's like a logic puzzle where there's going to be a scene that's really pivotal to the movie, and what you end up writing there, it's going to be challenging, but what you end up writing there is going to feed the rest of the film. And so really I wrote, a year before we even started filming, I wrote the theme of the movie, and that kind of was like more Hitchcockian, really like mysterious sounding Vertigo sort of thing. But there was this other aspect that we were missing, and it ended up being what was the bank heist music. And like I read that in the script, and I was like, this scene's going to be huge, and like it's really got to have this drive to it. And so doing that scene, that whole sequence is like completely driven by just this pulse. It just keeps shifting and turning, and but the drive that we kind of had to create there, and what was ended up being written there kind of fueled the rest of the movie, and that's what gave it that. That really, I didn't like a year before when I still wrote that first theme, I didn't expect it to have that aspect to it, but now once I got to see the film and understand it, it was like, okay, it needs this kind of drive to it, and the more we put that in, the more cutthroat it got. I mean, it just really makes it feel like a roller coaster. The twists are hitting you left and right, and it just keeps driving you. It really, really became a fun movie. So
Yeah. Well, I know, Robert, how important music is for you and your process. I remember when you were at Skywalker mixing Spy Kids. I remember chatting one day with Michael Semanek and asking him how the mix was going. He was like, "It was a great day. Robert brought in his electric guitar, and we plugged it directly into the console, and he was flying new music into the final mix on the day."
Yeah, he's still tweaking, got our guitars. He's playing guitars with me now. Music was always a big thing, and I started writing more and more for my movies. So my version of his story was, after he finished, playing in high school, and he thought about doing some he just said it kind of as a what if. He said, I'm not going to take any more lessons, but I don't want to lose what I have. Wondering if I should try writing a score. And I said, oh man, come give me some help. I have to score this whole 20-minute VR film. Take a couple cues and see it. And I really thought, because he was into Japanese knife making at the time, that was his passion. I didn't realize he loved piano so much that he would go be an actual composer, because that's a hard job. I thought, he has never done it before. He's been playing other pieces, but as soon as he writes a couple pieces and he gives them to me for this movie, I'll just say, just write me a couple pieces, As soon as I have to give him notes on, well, this shouldn't be so much like a song. This has to I thought he would just go, I don't want to do this job. I have to go redo what I just did. I can already tell he probably wouldn't dig that so much. So I just let him off the hook and say, hey, do a couple if you want. And he blew my mind with what he wrote. And so I let him write the most of that 20-minute film. And then my next film, again, he was saying Red 11, this low budget movie. I needed to score this whole thing somehow, magically with no time that I had. So I said, come do a couple tracks for that. And everything he turned in was just the first take of everything he did. I was just like, 10 times what you just did, and we'll have this movie done. So I just more and more just let him take the reins, because it was just so good. And then by the time we did We Can Be Heroes, that was a full orchestral score. Okay, he hasn't done that. I've done that. Let's write that one together, because I can teach him kind of what orchestral writing is. The very first piece he gave me, we didn't even do it to picture. I put it to picture, and it fit so perfectly. I couldn't believe it. I showed him. Okay, good news and bad news. Good news is it fits like magic and works. Bad news, I have no idea how you did it. So I can't even help you write this movie. You're writing way beyond. You're like John Williams already. I don't know how to write that. So any scene I try and do is not going to sound at all like your scene. So you're going to have to do the whole thing now. But I just assisted him. I was his assistant editor. I was his editor, and I kept him fed, and his eyes were like this big, like I got to score this whole movie. But that's how I learned. You throw them in the deep end like that, and these are huge stakes. He's got to write a full orchestral score for a full film in like a couple of months. And they learned so much from that. And I learned so much from that now, that's just how we work, and I can trust him. I trust him, and I know each time it's different. Each score is different. You don't, just because you did one score doesn't mean the next one writes itself automatically. He's got to go battle it. That's how it was for me on every movie. That's how it still is on every movie. Every movie's like, yeah. You got to figure. You make it
sound so easy. Like he just nailed it the first time out. So I mean, Rebel, what's it like working with your dad? And I'm kind of curious, like, how do you guys navigate if you're not on the same page creatively?
I mean, the thing is
I'm always right. That's why it's easy.
We've been drawing together since we were little. We kind of grew up. He showed us all his old favorite things. I mean, we always have this funny story of he used to always play. I thought it was the radio in the car, and he'd put a CD of all his favorite music from the 80s. It was like all AC/DC and Kiss and the Police and Huey Lewis and the News. It was like all that kind of stuff, and that was what we grew up with. And I always thought it was the radio. And so when I went and heard like the normal music on the radio at the time, which, was like Justin Bieber and it was Pitbull. It was like, where's all the other music? Where did it go? I was like, it's like completely. So we've grown up with a lot of his favorite stuff he used to watch, because he was always just so excited to show us, Johnny Quest. He'd be like, now you're going to watch this. And that's like our whole childhood. So we think all so alike. I mean, usually we're just kind of covering each other's bases of like, when he says something like, oh, right, yeah, no, that's a good point. And when I say something, he's like, oh, yeah, I was just thinking that, it really just kind of works well together. And the fact that he also is such a composer, I mean, that makes such a dramatic difference. It's really, I think that's so important as a director to know at least a little bit of every job so you can communicate with the other people that you're working with and understand it. So he always has such a strong sense of not only the music, but how it fits the edit, how it fits the sound, how it fits the acting. That's a part I can't even fathom yet. And I'm starting to learn more and more about all of that from working with him. But to think at all those layers really helps it become so much better. So I usually just go all in on the music, and then he'll go and make sure it fits everything else that's going to be around it. And so it works really well, actually.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I mean, I only have to give him a note sometimes for like, everything works. This section here, let's just make this quieter and do that. And I'll sometimes mock it up for him.
And that's just so invaluable. He'll just mock it up, and it's like, thank you. I mean, the most useful thing to me is not just giving me some vague notes. Like, I don't know what that means. I'm going to figure it out. But it really makes.
And I know how music works. It's like so put together that your notes can be very surgical. So you're not going to have to redo the whole thing. It's like, no, the whole thing works. Let's just go surgically take out these 2 bars and put this instead. And he'll try and he'll go, oh, wow. And then it gives him more ideas.
Yeah. I mean, it's really cool. He edits so much for the music as well that, like, I would tell him some of these scenes, you know, when he edits and cuts it even faster and shorter as we're getting towards the final edit, it cuts the airtime out of the movie. But the cool thing is it cut all the airtime out of the music. That was a spot where I was just kind of riffing, because it's like, all right, this is kind of going on for a while. The next thing's coming up in a second. Just got to like riff for 2 bars. He chops those out. So I'm like, oh, now it can just like drive. And now it can really, really move. So
problem solved.
And I'll tell you the benefit of having your own in-house composer, because if you just hire a composer, they're trying to get a lot of work. They're trying to do as many movies and shows as they can while they have their career going. So they're not necessarily making music for your project. They're kind of doing their thing, and you're getting their thing, and they're going to do variations on their thing. This is all custom made to projects that they've been a part of since they were babies. So it's in their DNA like it's in my DNA. So my collaborators, as close I can get to getting clones, you know, people that from the same DNA that understand what you want, they like the same things. He gives me something, I'm going to love it because we just speak that language. And I know it's for this movie, and he's not thinking about his next gig or the other jobs, or that's the danger you get in having collaborators. They're there to do that, and they're off. But this is pure investment. If he wasn't here and Eraser wasn't here, those jobs wouldn't open up for someone else. I would just do those again myself, because I always had a secondary company. I actually have a company name that's called Nevermind, I'll Do It Myself Productions, because people make things such a hassle that it's not as easy as how you see our rapport is here, that you just go, I'd just rather do it myself than have to deal with somebody who's half their mind's on another project, or they keep giving you something you've already heard they did in another movie, and it's not your movie. They're going off making their own movie, and it's not the same thing. Here, we're all lockstep on the story we're trying to convey, the moments we're trying to convey, and we're all figuring it out together. And it's a great collaboration.
Yeah. One thing I'd say is really special is being a part of it so early on. You know, they're writing it, they're coming up with it, and they're telling me the ideas. You already feel like you're invested in a part of it. So once my part comes around and I actually go score the film, I'm writing stuff throughout. But once we actually go in and we start doing scene by scene, you know, you're so emotionally invested in what's been made so you've been watching it form this whole time. So you know how you want to deliver, how much you want to give it. So it really, I feel like I can be even more invested than if I was just dropped in at the end, which, you know, is mostly where most composers get.
Yeah,
they get the finished edit, you know, and it's like, all right, make something. And it's like, it can be hard to be into it if you're not like really into the whole process and you watch this thing grow.
Yeah, that's a luxury. That's why I usually just started writing, is because you don't get a composer on until the very end. So they don't have a lot of time to get into it. And then it's got to be delivered so quickly where you can't afford to have one on at the script writing stage or at the conception stage throughout. But I could if I was the composer. And now I still got that with him because he's there writing stuff. And sometimes you change the movie based on the music you're hearing. That's a whole other line. That's a whole other soundtrack of dialogue telling the audience who this character is. And if you can, sometimes I would write a piece of music to get a better handle on a character I was writing, and it would drive the script. So the music wasn't an after.
Well, I'm curious to kind of follow up on that, because Robert, I mean, you talk about Nevermind, I'll Do It Myself. I mean, but that's sort of like that's your DNA. I mean, you co-wrote, you directed the film, you served as the co-cinematographer, you edited the movie yourself. I know you're on the mixing board as well. Yeah. Like, so I'm just like, for you, what's it like all of these kind of processes, I think, are probably happening all at the same time. I mean, I even read something like you were cutting scenes at night so that you could show them to the cast and crew the next day while you were shooting, which is just, That's mind boggling to me. But
Yeah.
I mean, that it just seems like that's part of the way you've always made your movies, back to
Yeah.
El Mariachi, right?
It is, yeah. It was part of the process, was getting, you want your actors to be excited when they're filming. You don't want to wait to the premiere when it's too late. They can't do anything about it. Oh, the movie came out pretty good. I'd rather them be excited the next day they show up to work. And I want to get a taste to see if how it's working. So I would go home and do a quick edit of a sequence we just shot. I'd show it to them the next day. They're walking on cloud nine, seeing that what we're doing is working. So when we go into a scene, they can extrapolate, okay, what we did yesterday, which felt so weird, we're holding scissors and doing this and that. Wow, it looks like that. Okay, we're in good hands. We can just do our thing, and we know what we're making. So that's important. But usually, I kept all those jobs. I just love all those jobs, and they don't usually go on at the same time. Sometimes they can, like for that, but I don't have to sit there and edit every night to edit the movie. There'll be time to edit the movie. So when you're writing, you're just writing. When you're shooting, you're just shooting. You might be writing music in there, but it's just to show people what the sound is going to be like. And then you go into the editing, which is another fun thing. So you get to take a break from writing, you get to take a break from shooting, and then you can take a break from editing, do the score, and then you start all over again. So you can do all those jobs because they're not happening all at the same time. So you're not, like split. That would be harder if it all had to happen in the same. There's just not enough hours in the day. But because it's split out, it's why I chose to be a filmmaker. I always loved photography. I loved editing. I loved music. I loved drawing. And I thought, should I be a cartoonist? Should I be a musician? Well, if I'm a filmmaker, I can do all those things. If I make my own movies and do all those jobs, I got to keep all my favorite hobbies, and I've added more since then. And so you're just living your best life. And then when you add your family into it too, you're checked all the boxes. You're doing all your favorite things for a project that people are going to get to go see and enjoy. And the harder you work, the more family time you get. It's like, It's the best life. So
there you go.
We really figured it out, to where we are just having a blast. And
one thing that I've always admired about you, Robert, is like, I feel like you're pretty fearless about adopting new technology and integrating it into your process and your workflow. And I remember when I was at Skywalker Sound, a few times you came out, and you did those. You participated with George Lucas in his digital summits back in the early 2000s, when you guys were kind of trying to promote to other filmmakers, how to shoot digitally, and kind of embrace digital technology. And obviously, we're big proponents of Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos, and the Dolby Atmos mix on Hypnotic is pretty mind-boggling.
Great.
It's a great mix. So I'm just curious. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos. These technologies specifically, how do they help you unlock the experience for the audience and kind of enhance it?
I still remember Jim Cameron's and John Lando's, reaction to seeing Alita, in Dolby. The blacks, everybody's talking about just how even Weta hadn't seen it, the final thing done. And everyone was blown away when we first screened it that way. We thought, the first question was, how many theaters are going to get to see it like this? Because it was, you just couldn't go back. It's like, how did we not get to see it like this until the very end? So now that's great that we can. And that the sound, I was always a big adopter of 5.1 and surround. I was doing all those things. I think I did a 7 type mix on Desperado back in the day, because Sony was way into that, even though there weren't many theaters that could play it. I was just always into what's the latest thing. And I see that in my kids now. They do that for me. They come to me and say, we figured out that there's these programs that we can use to pre-visualize the movie, and we don't need any of these previous people. We can do it ourselves using this. And I'm like, damn, that's what we need. Who's on the cutting edge? Who's got their finger on the pulse of where things are going? How can you utilize that in your toolbox? I was that guy, back in the day. That's why George Lucas and I got along. I was just like, forget tradition. We were trying to, if Da Vinci had a forklift, he would have freaking used it. He would have used it. He wouldn't be making scaffolding. He'd be getting up there, and it would be just like, that's what you got to do, is use technology to help you bring out the art. Technology is not the art form. It's just a way for you to do it. So to use technology to convey, something that's mind blowing to watch, to listen to, that's Dolby, that's Atmos, that's the more that we can immerse people into this hypnotic construct we're making for them, the better, so they totally believe what they're seeing and their minds are blown and they're transported. We want to give them a real experience, and that's what that stuff allows.
I know that you kind of move back and forth between studio films and indie films, and obviously your DNA is about as indie and scrappy as I can possibly get. This is a pretty disruptive time in our business. The business models are all getting upended. This is what feels like a big budget movie with an A-list star that you guys made on an indie budget outside the studio system. Are you optimistic about where things are going in our business, or are you pessimistic?
This business has lasted a lot longer than I thought it was going to last. I mean, when I saw what happened to the music industry, I thought, oh, movies is next. It's been, 20 years. So I think people still enjoy consuming content. And if you're content creators, it doesn't, again, it's just like why I started shooting digital film. I wasn't that linked to tradition. What is it at the base of what we're doing? We're like editing. I was one of the first. I was the only movie on the Sony lot editing digitally on Desperado. Nobody wanted to touch that thing. They thought it was going to take their job away. Everyone was always fearful. I grew up in the industry where everybody was always fearful of the next day. I was not fearful of it. I thought, embrace technology. It's going to let you do things that you wouldn't normally do. And if everything shifts, really content is the king. So people are still going to want to consume content. They may consume it differently, but you still have to come up with ideas. You still have to come up with stories. So that's what we should verse ourselves. And that's what they've all been learning, us together, so that we can always create stories that people will want to see in whatever form it is. So I'm not pessimistic towards change. The industry usually is averse to it. It's more a reactive business than an innovative business. They usually see what someone else comes up with and then they go that way. That's why George and I got along. It's like, we're not waiting for people to start adopting digital. We're going to shove this thing through because we know this is going to improve and film will never improve. Film is just going to slowly get lower and slower. And the quality is already crap. It wasn't like the golden days when it was Technicolor and, 70 millimeter CinemaScope. It just degraded from there. We have to push the new technology to get new ideas and new ways of telling stories, because the art form is storytelling. It's not technology.
No, you're right. You remind me, one of my favorite things that George Lucas used to say about the new technology was like, this is the worst it's ever going to be.
Yeah, it's the worst it's going to be. It's only going to get better from
only going to get better from here.
My favorite story was one guy the other day I walked into when I was there doing one of the summits, because it was just me and him shooting digital back then. So we were showing all the big directors digital so they'd know what it was coming from filmmakers, not from cinematographers. And because crew took me behind the scenes to this room, and there's this huge tower in there. And they said, see, this is our server. It's 3 terabytes. And I was like, whoa, I never even heard that word. It's 3?
Yeah.
Here's now 3 terabytes is here.
Yeah.
And that was like 20 years ago. I mean, things change so fast.
Yeah, totally. So one final question for you, Robert. Is the director's chair going to come back? I got to tell you, like, that show, I have such fierce love for that show. And it was actually such an inspiration for me in terms of how I wanted to kind of model these interviews that I do. Like, you were so well prepared. You had such a love for everybody that was on that show. Like, I got to tell you, I think my favorite episode was when you had Barbara Streisand on. It was just it was such a surprise that you would bring her on your show and have that. But it was so clear from, like, you guys were vibing, talking about, about Yentl. Like, it was just, you had so much love for the director's work that you had on that show. I just wish you would bring it back.
Yeah, I would love to, especially her with the career she had, and, having to go up with such, people just saying, you can't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. That's what I heard my whole career. I could really identify with that, so I love that show. My next 2 were going to be Jim Cameron and Edgar Wright. But then Jim went off. I missed him right when he went down to go shoot The Way of Water. So I'll have to bring it back, because those are my 2 up in line. I just had dinner with Edgar. I'd love to interview those 2. And I kind of was concentrating on writer-directors, because you kind of see that their career is very linked to their personality, because they actually wrote this stuff. So you get a full picture of who they are as a person through their work. So there's not a lot of those. So, but all the ones that I interviewed were writer-directors. So if it was a director who directs other people's stuff, it wouldn't be quite, it'd still be entertaining. Sure. But yeah, I would do my homework, and I learned so much from doing that, by learning so much about them, hearing the answers I'd never heard, giving them sort of the elevated questions they had never heard, some of their favorite interviews. George Miller thought that was his favorite interview so much he gave me the steering wheel from Fury Road. They're all chasing around.
Well, I also learned I learned a great tip from you too, which is it never hurts to start with a shot of tequila before you sit down to talk.
All right. Shot of tequila always helps.
Well, I hope someday we can come out to Austin to Troublemaker and have you guys back on the Dolby podcast, and we'll do that shot of tequila.
Oh, you got to come here and see the place. It's crazy, and you'll see all the locations from Hypnotic here. We used every inch of this place.
Well, thank you guys for taking the time to come on the Dolby podcast today, Robert, Rebel. It was great to talk.
Thanks, Ben. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Many thanks to Rebel Rodriguez and the original Rebel Without a Crew, Robert Rodriguez, for joining us today to talk about Hypnotic. And special thanks to our friends over at Ketchup Entertainment for putting this interview together on such short notice. If you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you're subscribed to us, the Dolby Institute podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you will find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, thank you for joining us. This is the Dolby Institute podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Sunny Chen. Thank you for listening.